Boring History for Sleep. The Mystery of the Sleepy Pharaoh. A Whisper from Dusty Scrolls. History is often described as a crowded attic, full of forgotten objects, dim corners, peculiar smells, and the occasional treasure. Among these old memories, there exists a story that is nearly impossible to find in school textbooks, a story too quiet and too slow for the loud drumbeat of modern history classes. Yet it has survived in the dusty margins of ancient travel diaries, in the curious footnotes of forgotten British scholars, and in the vague oral traditions carried through Mediterranean ports. It is the tale of a pharaoh who did not belong to his time, a ruler who lived not in the age of pyramids, but long after sands had reclaimed their glory. This story, drifting from 5 centuries ago, fascinates American readers not because of battles or conquests, but because it teaches something subtle: how history can hide in plain sight, how humans repeat their past, and how even the most boring chronicles can whisper wisdom to the present day. A scholar with too much curiosity. Long before smartphones and textbooks, explorers relied on thick vellum maps that crumbled under sunlight and tore during storms. One of these explorers, a young English apprentice named Rowan Hale, stepped onto the port of Alexandria with nothing but a leather-bound notebook. His master, an aging historian from Cambridge, had given him a strange assignment. Find the tomb I couldn't find. Study the man no one remembers. Rowan did not know why his master cared about a king who didn't exist in any official Egyptian record. But he crossed the sea anyway, driven by the mixture of fear and eagerness only young learners know. A feeling American students, buried under homework, might still recognize today. Alexandria welcomed him with salt in the air and the loud bargaining of merchants. But buried beneath its noise was a layer of ancient silence, as if the city was still listening to secrets spoken thousands of years ago. The legend of the sleeping king. Rowan first heard the legend from a spice seller who spoke with the calm certainty of someone who had repeated a story many times. According to local lore, a pharaoh from a forgotten dynasty had been discovered alive in his sealed tomb by desert travelers. His body was perfectly preserved, not in the stiff stillness of death, but in a gentle, almost peaceful slumber. The legend claimed that the pharaoh's eyelids occasionally trembled, that his fingers twitched as though he was dreaming, and that his chest rose with the faintest breath. A sleeping king, Rowan whispered into his notebook. A man who ruled by dreaming. To American readers accustomed to superhero movies and science fiction, this may sound like fantasy. But Rowan wasn't searching for magic. He was searching for the misunderstanding behind myth, the human error, the forgotten detail, the lost explanation. A desert that erases and reveals. The desert is an odd historian. It buries what humanity builds, but it also preserves what time tries to erase. Rowan traveled south on camelback with a caravan that followed old trade routes. Each night he lay under a sky so bright with stars that it felt like the universe was watching him. Days passed slowly, sand stretching endlessly ahead. The monotony, though dull, gave him time to think about how stories travel, how rumors evolve, and how history is shaped not by what happened, but by what people choose to remember. American readers often learn history through timelines and bullet points, but Rowan was learning it as the ancients did, through landscapes, encounters, and silent reflection. The village by the sleeping dunes. At the edge of a place locals called the Sleeping Dunes, he found a small desert village. Its mud brick homes clung to the earth like tired guardians. Children played in the shade of palm trees. Women carried water in clay jars. Old men smoked near the well, their eyes sharp enough to see through any traveler's lies. Rowan approached the oldest among them, a man with a beard so white it seemed carved from salt. "Tell me about the pharaoh who sleeps," Rowan asked. The old man smiled slowly, revealing missing teeth but endless patience. "He is not a pharaoh," the elder said. He was a leader of people who had lost their kingdom, a man who carried history in his bones. We call him the Sleepy Pharaoh because he dreamed what others feared to remember. The villagers believed he had been a historian, not a king, who recorded stories the world wished to forget. When he died, his body was treated with unusual care, preserved with techniques unknown to later generations. Rowan wrote fervently, "A historian mistaken for a king, a preserved body mistaken for life. Misunderstandings layered upon misunderstandings, like sediment forming fossils. The tomb that should not exist." Guided by villagers, Rowan walked toward a rocky outcrop where desert winds carved strange patterns into the stone. Behind a curtain of dunes lay a half-buried doorway. Its entrance was narrow, silent, and swallowed by shadow. Inside, the air was cool and dry. The walls were painted with symbols, not of gods and battles, but of scrolls, libraries, and wandering scholars. Rowan realized he had found not a royal tomb, but a sanctuary for knowledge. In the center lay a stone platform. Upon it rested a man wrapped in linen, his facial features astonishingly intact. His expression was calm, almost thoughtful. Rowan leaned in, heart thudding. "He looks alive," he whispered into his notebook. The villagers bowed their heads respectfully. "He sleeps in history," one murmured, "and history never truly dies." But Rowan noticed something else, an herbal scent, faint but present, a mixture that might have been used in ancient preservation practices. Not magic, not life, just science lost to time. Still, he could not deny the eerie realism of the man's face. It felt like staring into the past so deeply that the past stared back. Why this boring tale matters. What Rowan discovered in that tomb expanded his understanding of history. It wasn't glamorous, it wasn't dramatic, it didn't involve heroic battles or glittering treasure, but it revealed something valuable, how fragile truth becomes when wrapped in centuries of storytelling. For American readers, his lesson remains relevant. History is not a straight line. It is a maze shaped by memory, error, imagination, and curiosity. And sometimes the most boring stories, the ones not taught in classrooms, carry the quietest but deepest truths. A debate between silence and discovery. Rowan stood in the cool chamber, unsure if he should feel victorious or disappointed. The tomb was astonishing, yes, but it did not hold a supernatural king or immortal ruler. Instead, it held the preserved body of a man whose achievements were buried by time. He scribbled notes until his fingers cramped. Was this truly the figure that European scholars had whispered about? Was this the Sleepy Pharaoh, the man believed to slumber eternally? Yet something continued to bother him. The villagers spoke of the man not as a king, but as a memory keeper, someone who took on the burdens of lost civilizations. That did not explain how the legend had reached foreign shores, twisted into a myth of a sleeping monarch. History had always been the quietest storyteller, but rumor was loud, dramatic, and eager to exaggerate. Rowan's task was to trace how silence turned into sensation. The scrolls in the chamber. As his eyes adjusted to the dim lantern light, he noticed clay jars along the chamber walls. Some were sealed with hardened resin. Others had cracked over time. Carefully, he opened one and found rolled parchment inside. The texture was fragile, almost powdery, yet the writing remained clear, beautifully inked symbols arranged in long lines. But they were not hieroglyphs. They were written in a script Rowan had seen only once in his master's private archives. Proto-historical Mediterranean cursive, Rowan whispered in awe. This script belonged not to Egypt's ancient dynasties, but to wandering scribe societies that moved between regions, recording stories of defeated tribes, collapsed kingdoms, and forgotten refugees. These scribes viewed history not as a collection of victories, but as a mosaic of losses. The man preserved in the chamber was one of them. Rowan's heart pounded as he realized he was holding the life's work of a historian who lived centuries before modern nations formed. His preserved body was not a monument to power, but a monument to memory. Why had European scholars mistaken him for a pharaoh? Because they looked for kings everywhere. Because they assumed tombs were for rulers. Because they misunderstood the quiet intentions behind ancient practices. Rowan felt a sudden responsibility settle onto his shoulders. He owed this forgotten historian the truth. The Dream Tablet. On a small stone table, Rowan found a rectangular wooden frame with clay pressed into it. This was a writing tool far older than paper, used by travelers who needed something reusable. The surface carried faint lines, as though someone had once recorded their dreams upon it. The symbols described long journeys through collapsing empires, burning libraries, and people who carried their histories in songs when their scrolls were taken. One line stood out. "If I must sleep to protect their stories, let my slumber outlive their silence." The sentence struck Rowan deeply. This man had prepared not for death, but for purposeful preservation. His body, his scrolls, his chamber, all were tools designed to survive the erasing force of time. Perhaps that was why the villagers treated him as a king. He ruled not through power, but through knowledge. To American readers, accustomed to debates about historical accuracy and forgotten narratives, this discovery echoes a familiar truth. History is often preserved not by heroes, but by quiet individuals whose names fade long before their legacy does. The heat of day and questions of night. When Rowan left the tomb after hours of study, the desert sun blazed overhead. Yet instead of feeling relief upon returning to the village, he felt heavy with questions. He spent the evening with the elders, sharing tea and thoughts. The old man with the salt-white beard watched him with knowing eyes. "You are troubled, young scholar," he said. Rowan nodded. "I expected answers. Instead, I found more questions. Why does no one else know about this? Why were the scrolls hidden? Why did history forget him?" The elder stirred the tea slowly. "Because history remembers what is loud. He was quiet." Rowan reflected on how often American students learn the stories of conquerors, not chroniclers, generals, not gentle thinkers, nations, not nomads. The forgotten historian represented millions of unnoticed voices. He held stories that rulers wished to bury, the elder continued. People who lose their homes often lose their history. He gathered those fragments and preserved them. But when powerful men rewrite the world, they do not want reminders of those they erased. Rowan understood. The Sleepy Pharaoh became a myth not because he was mysterious, but because he was inconvenient. The scholar's dilemma. For several days he stayed in the village, studying the scrolls in shaded courtyards, comparing symbols, translating fragments, and reconstructing narratives. Each scroll revealed a different lost community. Shepherd tribes chased from riverbanks, seafaring families whose ports were swallowed by storms, farmers displaced by early empires. The preserved historian had cataloged human resilience more than human triumph. Rowan knew that if he brought these scrolls back to Europe, they would be misunderstood again, or worse, exploited. Scholars might twist them into proof of imaginary kingdoms or exaggerated dynasties. Treasure hunters might desecrate the tomb looking for valuables that did not exist. Yet, if he left everything where it was, the scrolls might decay and vanish forever. He was trapped between two dangers: exposure and erasure. American readers today still grapple with similar dilemmas. What parts of history deserve preservation? Who decides which stories matter? What responsibility do researchers hold when encountering forgotten truths? Rowan realized he needed to choose carefully. A night of stars and answers. One night, while lying beneath the sprawling desert sky, Rowan listened to the wind brushing across the dunes.
It sounded strangely like pages flipping. A thought struck him so clearly that he sat upright. "History doesn't need rescuing," he whispered. "It needs respecting." The villagers had preserved the chamber for generations without exploiting it. They honored the historian as a guardian of stories, not as an object of curiosity. Rowan decided his role was not to disrupt this legacy, but to document it ethically. He would write everything down in his notebook, translate the scrolls onto fresh paper, and share the ideas, not the location, not the tomb, not the artifacts that could tempt greed. He would protect the site's secrecy. The final visit to the tomb. Before leaving the village, Rowan returned to the chamber one last time. Lantern in hand, he approached the preserved historian, whose peaceful face seemed untouched by the centuries. "I know you are not a pharaoh," Rowan said softly, feeling foolish for speaking aloud, "but perhaps dreaming was your form of ruling." He placed his notebook beside the body for a moment, imagining what it would be like to spend one's life recording the world's forgotten people. It must have been lonely, yet profoundly meaningful. Rowan traced one sentence from a scroll. "A memory that sleeps is never truly lost." He bowed respectfully, thanking the man not for glory, not for discovery, but for the reminder that history's truest value lies in its humanity. Before leaving, he noticed something he had missed before. A small carving near the stone platform, showing two hands, one writing, the other holding a flame. Knowledge and hope, preservation and resilience. It was a symbol for all time. The journey back to Alexandria. The return journey felt shorter, though the landscape had not changed. Rowan had changed. The desert no longer seemed empty. It was a great library whose books were buried in sand, waiting for those who approach with humility. He reached Alexandria with dusty clothes and a heart full of purpose. The bustling city felt different now, its modern chaos layered over ancient worlds that still pulsed beneath streets and markets. Rowan spent days at an old scholar's inn, copying his translations, refining his notes, and shaping his findings into a long manuscript that future readers, American, European, or otherwise, could learn from without disturbing the burial site. Yet he expected his master to criticize him. The man valued tangible proof, not philosophical interpretations. Rowan whispered to himself, "Truth is not always something you can carry." The apprenticeship's end. When he finally presented his manuscript to his aging master back in England, the old historian examined it quietly for hours. Rowan braced for disappointment. But instead, the master sighed deeply. "You understand what most scholars never learn. History is not about what we find, it is about how we listen." Rowan felt relief wash over him. "You have protected something sacred," the master continued. "Not the tomb, but the narrative." The manuscript was published anonymously, at Rowan's request, to protect the village from discovery. It circulated slowly, read mostly by curious scholars and wandering learners. The myth of the Sleepy Pharaoh persisted in popular imagination.